Have you ever wanted to swim over mountains? Well, you can do that, and all you have to do is go to China. Of course, in the modern world, this is only possible because of systems connected to dams and hydroelectric power plants. In fact, China provides around one-third of the world's hydroelectric power. Regarding it, China produces 391 of the 1360 GWh produced worldwide, which is not surprising given the vast number of hydroelectric power plants in the nation, some of which are true record breakers. For example, the Three Gorges Dam is the largest hydroelectric plant in the world, with an installed capacity of 22. 5 GWh's enormous size and yearly production, the Batten Dam in China, which is smaller than the Three Gorges Dam but still ranks second in the world's largest hydroelectric power plants. In fact, the top 5 spots are all occupied by Chinese structures, allows them to manufacture ships in this nation. Can float over mountains, and today you'll discover how China pulled this off. Gallatin Dam, which is in China's Giza province, is just a short distance away from this shiplift. A watercraft travels along a canal toward a lofty building and then glides within the. Naturally, the building's interior is quite unique. It has a lifting cable, 2 rows of drums for it, and gearboxes on both sides. In other words, it functions as a lift for someone living in a typical high-rise. That enormous area with all those moving parts may seem strange and excessively slow, but the designers claim that's precisely because of all. An average passenger ship can practically soar above its original location in a short period of time thanks to this lift, which can raise or lower a 500-ton ship in about 10 minutes. The maximum weight that the massive lift can support is 1,800 tons. A ship of that size would take longer to lift, but, to be honest, no one would likely care. It's no wonder that some people refer to this system as the Gallatin, an impressive feat of engineering, or even an awesome feat of engineering, because any vessel would be raised to an incredible height of 236 feet, which can vary depending on the river current and reach as high as 259 feet. You can imagine rising to the height of roughly a 26-story building on a ship. There are 3 lifts in the system. After the first one arrives, the second one raises the ship by 417 feet. The mechanism operates similarly for the other 2 lifts. Of course, you could argue with such grandiose statements because ship lifts have been in use for a long time throughout the world. The water transport entering the Gallatin Dam lift system is raised by 653 feet after entering, waiting for the system to start, and then rising altogether. Let's just say that comparisons are unavoidable in this case. For instance, the height that the ships reach is roughly equivalent to a 66-story building that is part of the Great Pyramid. If you were standing close by, you could see Giza from above. This Egyptian wonder is 456 feet tall, and the Statue of Liberty, let's not even talk about it, is only 305 feet tall. To get to the water behind the dam, you must somehow descend after navigating 2 lifts. The Chinese system has one more lift, and it's at the very end of the mountain navigation route and drops you by a maximum of 154 feet. This height is dependent on the water level once more. By the way, the system may appear to have a poor throughput because the vessel, despite rising fairly quickly, is only one vessel. It is not comparable to free movement on the river where multiple. She will never be able to get a similar throughput with this lift system, but only to a certain extent because there may be a whole line of ships traveling to the lifts. As soon as one vehicle passes the first lift, another can be raised immediately after. It's not perfect, but the aqueduct, which has 3 lifts that make toying with height look incredibly easy, is an incredible feat of Chinese engineering, but there is a distance between both. Engineers did everything they could to speed up travel along this path. Locks are used for moving between different heights, so there's no need to cross mountains. Multi-stage transitions from one level to another are also accomplished without requiring significant additional work. In other words, you simply install a few locks. Lifts that you must somehow cross are typically not something that people put much effort into. And a ship progressively ascends or descends, first to one height, then to another, and so forth. However, in this case, they must move ships between mountains, and the river did not have a lift system installed from the beginning, so in addition to constructing the 3 elevators, they also had to construct a path between them, the majority of which. There is an open aqueduct between the 2 lifts and the mountain. These kinds of structures are not uncommon. They were constructed in antiquity, so people were able to get by without sophisticated modern technology. However, in this case, they had to somehow incorporate the aqueduct into the mountainous landscape and the entire lift system. So there were many more challenges, but the Chinese naturally succeeded in creating the second section of the route, which passes through the mountain. Since the People's Republic of China is essentially an expert at tunnel construction, using enormous tunnel boring machines, everything was completed. Simply as it should have been, therefore the nation enjoys a waterway that extends 4 miles separate the mountains, and inside the mountains, yes, the entire system ended up costing a lot of money. The dam was being built from The main feature of this dam, which was constructed between 2003 and 2009, is an arch dam. Its shape and location are almost the same as another Chinese dam that was constructed recently, but in terms of size, the modern Star doesn't quite match this dam with a unique ship lift system. It stands 760 feet tall and 1830 feet long, while Biotin reaches a sky-high 950 feet and spans an amazing 2330 feet. As a result, the power of the hydroelectric stations also fluctuates, and the Baton hydroelectric dam has an overall capacity of 16,000 megawatts, which is on an otherworldly level. While Gayton isn't up to par, its capacity is just 3,000 megawatts, and the annual output is also entirely different. Biotin emits 6,240 kWh of energy, while Gayton doesn't even reach 10,000 kWh. As a result, the Gayton Dam and hydroelectric power station aren't particularly noteworthy aside from the shipping system that allows you to float over the mountains. It begs the question, why were such massive investments of time, money, and effort necessary if even the main object isn't exactly reasons for building grand reasons for building? Let's first examine the location of the dam and its ship lift system, which is extremely narrow and difficult. Location for ships, where we simply overlook the need for a lock system at first. It's also crucial to remember that China did a good job building the Gayton Dam. Any dam that blocks a river causes water to accumulate on one side, raising the water level there. On the other side, where water flow is restricted, the level occasionally drops. Although there isn't much of a difference between the water levels before and after the dam, in the case of the Gayton hydroelectric station, the drop was so great that they had to abandon even this system with a single lift. Raising the ships to such a height would have been too time-consuming and dangerous, so is it really necessary to construct a dam and a hydroelectric power plant there, or whether it's difficult to create a less expensive and labor-intensive project? Let's look at Giza Province, which is situated on the Yunnan-Gizil Plateau and has an average elevation of roughly 3,600 feet. The topography can be broadly categorized into three primary types: valleys, hills, and mountain plateaus, but there are 92. 5% of the region is composed of rugged, mountainous terrain that is unsuitable for standard transportation infrastructure. Many rivers flow through this area regardless of how you. Perhaps they shouldn't have constructed the dam here at all. But hold on, that's not really the right thing to say. Other power sources in the area are far weaker than hydroelectric ones, and the completed dam will become a problem for water transport, which frequently needs to be solved with unconventional methods like a triple lift system. The Geo government is attempting to make the most of what nature has to offer, and as a result, on the Ru River alone, there are 8 hydroelectric power plants with a total capacity of 8,500 MW, one of which is Gayton. This is because the authorities simply couldn't ignore the promising hydropower potential here, which is 187.45 million kilo, ranking 6th in China. The region's hydroelectric potential, by the way, is closely linked to a national initiative, whereby China intends to drastically transform its energy sector toward renewable sources by 2030. By 2035, renewable energy is anticipated to make up a sizable portion of the nation's overall energy, and maximizing the use of hydroelectric resources is undoubtedly the simplest and most efficient way to deal with GA's mountains and rivers. In fact, there are many rivers in Geo, so perhaps it would have been preferable to send ships on different routes so they wouldn't obstruct the hydropower plants. We'll talk about that now. A tributary of the Yangtze, the War River is the longest and most water-rich river in Eurasia, ranking 3rd in the world in terms of water volume and 4th in terms of length. It is also the longest river to pass through a single nation, occupying a fifth of China's total land area and housing about 1/3 of its population. Since the Yi Delta accounts for up to 20% of China's GDP, it is only natural that a number of transportation routes, both passenger and freight, run alongside this river. Let's just say that any part of China that isn't connected to the Yangtze Southeast would love to be a part of this fantastic Chinese transportation hub in Gao. This is made possible by the Wu River, as we have already mentioned. The Gayton hydropower plant, with its lift system that can handle 2,928 million tons of cargo annually, is one of its tributaries, so the area needed both energy development and connections to the water transport routes. One could argue that it's always possible to transport goods using, say, semi-trailers or freight trains. However, both of those options are less effective. For instance, a typical Seas truck can carry roughly 22 to 25 tons, so let's aim for an average of 23 tons. Additionally, keep in mind that the Gupin Dam lift can raise a vessel weighing 500 tons, but as we stated, that's not the limit. Ultimately, one barge can replace several dozen trucks. Let's examine the roads in the mountainous Geo region. It is either impossible or very difficult to construct a broad highway that can accommodate many trucks in addition to ordinary cars, and if trucks are sent along these narrow mountain roads and bridges, it is dangerous and slow. In other words, Who needs it when there's water transportation? Rail transport is a little better than barges and other cargo vessels in terms of fuel efficiency, but it's still difficult to lay down tracks, and the train still loses out to ships in terms of efficiency. Despite all the issues with these ship lifts, the region received the best possible solution for a significant sum of money, and we, for our part, received a amazing sight and learned that sailing a ship over the mountains is more feasible than the Three Gorges Dam. If you're not aware of another lift, guess which dam I'm referring to. A serious rival well ship that can support 1,800 tons is a serious claim to a record. Of course, Grand Opera O units came with grand sizes. The Three Gorges Dam, China's giant record holder, has a lift that can raise about 3,000 tons, which is plenty of space. The lift has a pool that is about 400 feet long and 60 feet wide, and the amount of water it holds is roughly equal to 4 Olympic swimming pools. Considering the multi-lift systems we saw today, the speed is slower, and the Three Gorges Dam lift takes 40 minutes to complete, but bear in mind that this is a single elevator lifting an enormous amount of weight. Almost any vessel with the stated maximum weight can be lifted by this elevator to a height of 371 feet above the ground. Weight to a considerable height. In other words, you cannot undervalue the genius of Chinese engineers. In addition to their efforts to guarantee safety, the vessel's chamber is rigidly held at 4 points by 4 symmetrically arranged sets of drive mechanisms with gears and supports, which helps to mitigate the effects of water tilting. Or the designers also ensure that the system is safe even during emergencies like earthquakes by including buffer and damping mechanisms in the shiplift chamber that absorb shocks and vibrations. One of the people involved in the construction says that such swaying inside the chamber also lowers the risk of the chamber overturning. After the lift was operational, the positive effects were immediately apparent. According to the three beautiful navigation companies, the dam's throughput in the first half of 2023 was 84. This is because the protection in the event of an earthquake transfers the seismic forces to the columns, preventing the chamber from collapsing and other major mishaps. 5 million tons and 9. As you can understand, before the lift was constructed at the Three Gorges Dam ships, the number of locks was 32% more than the previous year, setting a new historical high. Nevertheless, they used another engineering marvel, a multi-stage lock system. There are 2 sets of navigation locks adjacent to the dam, each with 5 stages, and it takes roughly 4 hours to get through them. This is the primary reason China is considering constructing a lift system that would take 40 minutes as opposed to 4 hours. Since the Yangtze Southeast is the main waterway and cannot really be used in any other way, there is a significant difference that could have a major effect on the economies of both individual companies and the entire nation. The transit system consists of a 5-stage, 2-lane lock system, each stage measuring 920 feet long by 115 feet wide by 16 feet deep, and the maximum weight of a vessel is approximately 10,000 tons, so you might say that almost every kind of freight or passenger vehicles that can move along rivers can fit through it. How much do the locks contribute to China's economy? In 2022, the cargo turnover reached 159 even with a 4-hour journey through all the stages. 5 millimeters. Which is fortunate since perhaps that explains why a massive lift appeared on the Scottish Miracle Dam. Now let's move on to Scotland, where in 2002 they developed a way to connect the canals using a Firk wheel. Initially, they employed an 11-gate system, but it got dismantled, leaving the Forth, Clyde, and Union canals disconnected for nearly 70 years. Then in 2002, this novel system emerged. Initially, a unique Ferris wheel design with 4 gondolas was suggested, and while this concept was well received overall, it turned out to be different from what British Waterways had originally intended. The finished design, which is 115 feet tall and uses 2 gondolas to hold 300 tons of water, meaning the wheel moves 600 tons of cargo with each lift, was inspired by a Celtic axe, a ship's propeller, and a whale's rib cage. What's most intriguing is that the gondolas are balanced because the boats displace their own weight in water, which means that moving them requires surprisingly little energy. The same amount as boiling 8 kettles of water, it should be noted, and that this is the only structure of its kind in the world, proving that China is not the only country that can make incredible objects that enable vessels to move in such a unique way.